Elvis was late. On the night of June 27, 1956, the emerging king of rock and roll was set to play here at the Bell Auditorium in Augusta. Robert Symms, the photographer sent by the Chronicle to cover the event, was waiting at a side door, and waiting, and waiting. And just then, a cab pulled up to the curb, a bunch of young men got out, and history happened. The late Mr. Symms, on assignment then for the Chronicle, recalled years later that it wasn't until the group of guys got really close that he recognized the teen heartthrob. He was kind of rumpled, Symms said. Others agreed. The Chronicle account the next day suggested Elvis needed a haircut. The screaming, yelling auditorium full of fans, however, weren't there to critique hairstyles. They were there to see a rising star that had captured the nation's notice. It was actually the second time the then 21-year-old Presley had been to Augusta in 3 months. He had headlined a country-themed show in March of 1956. June Carter was also on that show, and a couple of Grand Ole Opry comedians. But for some reason, the Chronicle and most of the other media didn't really cover it. 3 months later, they got a second chance. Advertisements in the Chronicle and Augusta Herald and a brief story advancing the show seemed to be the only record Elvis was even in town. Newspaper coverage in the Chronicle and the Herald is hard to find. 3 months later, the newspaper's editors began to take notice of Presley's popularity, particularly with young people, and they sent the always reliable Robert Symms to photograph the event. 3 months after that, Elvis was on the Ed Sullivan TV show, and then he belonged to the world. I guess that's how we'd say it because he never came back to perform in our town. Despite the lack of interest from Augusta adults or Augusta newspaper editors, Elvis's trip to Augusta was a really big deal, and those who saw it talked about it for decades. More than 6,000 teens crammed the Bell and watched what the Chronicle called the hottest thing in music today. Wearing a flaming red jacket, he ground, twitched, and swung his hips, the newspaper said. The Chronicle account said that Presley took the microphone, dragged it to the edge of the stage, and when he sang his last note, he jumped, went to a cab, and drove away, disappointing many who were in the audience. Actually, Elvis had driven down the street to Luigi's. He was hungry. When some of his fans found out where he was, they went down to see him. The next day, the Chronicle account, written by Lloyd, a future Augusta Herald city editor and business editor, adds many details for Elvis fans. He was in perpetual motion, even when talking, and if a girl comes up, he immediately throws his arms around her. He said he'd never lived in the country, but has picked cotton and driven a tractor and a truck. Motorcycling was his favorite hobby. Right now, he drives a white Eldorado Cadillac, but also has a pink one, a blue one, and a yellow one too. He admitted he doesn't know music, but his performance was simple. Just go out there and go crazy. He also said he doesn't rehearse. He said he doesn't smoke or drink and phones his mother 4 or 5 times a week. The reporter covering the event made a prediction. Elvis Presley's future, he said, looked bright. No kidding. You know, if he'd lived, he would have been 80 this month. And we'd like to think that maybe in all that time he could have come back to Augusta again.